I'll never forget the sound my wine glass made when I set it down on that white tablecloth. It wasn't loud, but in that moment of absolute silence at our table, it might as well have been a gunshot. My father had just announced with the casual entitlement of a king, declaring his divine right that he, my mother, and my sister Chloe would be moving into my penthouse next week. My childhood home had been mortgaged to fund Chloe's art gallery, and now they needed somewhere to live. Just like that. No asking, no discussion, just an expectation that I would hand over the keys to my home, the sanctuary I had built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. I looked at my father across the candlelit table of this upscale Austin restaurant where tech entrepreneurs and venture capitalists made deals that shaped the future. His expression was so smug, so absolutely certain that I would comply. Chloe and her boyfriend Blake were already smirking, probably mentally redecorating my bedroom. My mother Susan added with that particular tone of hers that always made me feel like a disappointing investment. "It's the least you can do for your family, Maya. The least I can do." Those words echoed in my head as I felt something inside me crack wide open. Not break. Crack. Like a door that had been sealed shut for 28 years, finally splitting at the hinges. I picked up my wine glass, took one more sip of the Cabernet, and set it back down with that decisive little click. Then I looked my father dead in the eye and said something I never thought I'd have the courage to say. "The buyout price for the penthouse is $1.2 million. I accept payment by check or wire transfer before 9 a.m. tomorrow. If you're enjoying this story of standing up to toxic family dynamics, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about breaking free and reclaiming your power. Drop a comment below if you've ever had to set boundaries with people who thought they owned you. Now let me take you back to where this all really began. The story doesn't start at that dinner table. It starts the day I became invisible. I was 5 years old, Goku, when Chloe was born. I remember standing in that hospital room watching my mother cradle this tiny screaming thing while my father took endless photos. My grandmother held my hand and whispered, "You're a big sister now." What she didn't say was that I'd stopped being a daughter. The miracle baby, they called her. Years of fertility treatments, thousands of dollars, prayers answered. Chloe wasn't just a child. She was an investment, a trophy proof that my parents could have the perfect daughter they'd always wanted. And me, I was the practice run they were ready to forget. 7 years old, burning with fever that turned out to be pneumonia. My mother dropped me at Mrs. Patterson's house with a bottle of children's Tylenol and instructions to call if I got worse. Then she drove Chloe to toddler music class because missing a single session would disrupt her development. I remember Mrs. Patterson's scratchy plaid couch, the smell of mothballs, and the desperate hope that my mother would come back early. She didn't. I learned that day that my pain was less important than Chloe's piano lessons. 10 years old, standing on a stage with a blue ribbon for my solar energy project. 3 months of work learning about photovoltaic cells until my eyes burned. My father had promised he'd be there. I scanned the audience row by row, certain I'd missed him. The empty seat next to my teacher felt like a physical wound. Later that night, I heard him laughing on the phone telling someone about Chloe's theater audition. She hadn't even gotten the part, but her failure was more important than my success. 13 years old, handing my mother $100 in crumpled bills for my babysitting job. Money I'd saved for a calculator I desperately needed. Chloe needed ballet shoes, custom ones. My mother hugged me and called me mature, responsible, such a good sister. I felt warm for exactly 10 seconds before the hollowness set back in. I never got that calculator. I borrowed a broken one from school that glitched through half my homework. 16 years old, staring at an empty tampon box in my bathroom. $2,140 gone. 2 years of diner shifts, hidden tips, dreams of escape. Chloe needed a Louis Vuitton bag for her social image. When I confronted my parents, my father looked at me like I was speaking another language. "Don't be selfish, Maya. There's always more money." Not for me, I thought. Never for me. These weren't dramatic moments of abuse. There were no bruises, no screaming matches, no obvious scars, just a steady drip of neglect that eroded me so slowly I didn't notice I was disappearing. I learned to make myself smaller, quieter, less. I learned that love was conditional, and I was always one mistake away from losing even the scraps they gave me. I learned that my value was measured in what I could provide, not who I was. High school was when exploitation became systematic. I worked at Maria's Diner, a greasy spoon, where truckers and construction workers left decent tips if you smiled through their bad jokes. Maria, the owner, saw something in me that my parents never did. She'd slip me extra food to take home, ask about my grades, tell me stories about her daughter who'd escaped to college and never looked back. "You're smart, mija," she'd say. "Don't let anyone clip your wings." But my wings were already clipped. Every paycheck went home. Every tip disappeared into the family black hole. I told my parents I worked 15 hours a week. The truth was closer to 35. I opened a secret bank account across town, lied about my schedule, stashed money in places they'd never look. I was 17 and already living like a criminal in my own home. MIT. That was my North Star, my escape hatch, my reason to survive. I taught myself programming in the library after school. I took every AP class offered. I wrote scholarship essays until my fingers cramped. When the acceptance letter came thick and heavy with possibility, I cried in Maria's back room for 20 minutes. Full scholarship, full ride. Everything paid for. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. I should have left without telling them, should have packed my bags in secret and disappeared into a future they couldn't touch. But I was 18 and stupid and still believed that maybe this time they'd be proud of me. I got into MIT, I announced at dinner, my voice shaking with hope and terror. My father glanced up from his phone. "That's nice, honey." Then back to Chloe's drama about some boy. "That's nice," like I'd mentioned the weather. "Full scholarship," I pressed desperate. "Everything paid for. I leave in August." The room went quiet. My mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. But the look on her face wasn't pride. It was calculation, cold and sharp as a blade. "That's wonderful, Maya. We're so proud. But we need to talk about Chloe." Always Chloe, always. The Bali retreat cost $60,000. 6 months of creative healing for a scandal my parents never fully explained. And I, with my full scholarship and my bright future, clearly didn't need anything. So could I defer just 1 year, maybe 2, just until Chloe was back on her feet? I looked at my mother's expectant face, my father's guilty eyes that wouldn't meet mine, Chloe's small, satisfied smile. And I said yes, God help me, I said yes. 1 year became 3. The MIT scholarship expired like a carton of milk I'd forgotten in the back of the fridge. I worked 2 jobs, sent money home, and watched my dreams rot, while Chloe posted Instagram photos from Bali with captions about finding herself. I was 21 years old, exhausted down to my bones, and I'd given up everything for people who saw me as an ATM with a pulse. But I had learned something valuable during those 3 years at the law firm. I watched the lawyers work, listened to them talk about contracts and liability and asset protection. I absorbed information like a sponge. One of the partners, a woman named Rebecca Chen, took an interest in me. She noticed I was reading legal textbooks during my lunch breaks. "Why aren't you in law school?" she asked me one day. "Long story," I said. "Family obligations." She gave me a look that said she understood more than I was saying. "Come to my office after work. Let's talk." That conversation changed my trajectory. Rebecca didn't push me to go to law school. Instead, she taught me about business structures, about protecting assets, about building things that couldn't be taken away. She introduced me to the concept of trusts and LLC structures. She showed me how the wealthy protected their money from creditors, ex-spouses, and in some cases their own families. "Knowledge is power, Maya," she told me, "and the law is a tool. Learn to use it." I did. I spent my free time learning everything I could about business law, corporate structures, and asset protection. I also started teaching myself to code again, the dream I'd put aside. Late at night after my restaurant shift ended, I'd come home to my tiny apartment that I shared with 3 roommates and sit at my secondhand laptop, working through programming tutorials and building small projects. I wasn't going to MIT anymore. That dream was dead, but I could still build something. I could still create a life that was mine. The turning point came when I was 23. My roommate Diane worked at a small biotech company, and she mentioned they were looking for someone to help with their website. It was a contract position, not much money, but I jumped at it. I built them a clean, functional website in 2 weeks. They were impressed. They asked if I could help with some of their data management systems. I said yes. I didn't know much about biotech, but I knew how to code and I learned fast. I spent my nights researching medical imaging diagnostic tools and how AI was being applied to healthcare. I saw inefficiencies in their systems and built tools to fix them. Within 6 months, they'd hired me full-time as their first junior developer. I was making $40,000 a year, which felt like a fortune. But it wasn't a fortune because I was still supporting my family. My parents had convinced me to co-sign on a loan for them. Chloe needed money every month for her studio and supplies. My father had quit his job claiming back problems and was essentially retired at 54. My mother didn't work. Everything fell on me. But I was learning to be strategic. I gave them money, yes. But I kept meticulous records of every transfer, every check, every dollar. I documented everything in a spreadsheet with dates and purposes. When they asked why I was keeping track, I lied and said it was for tax purposes. They believed me because they didn't understand taxes. I was also splitting my income in ways they didn't know about. I told them I made $30,000 a year. The extra $10,000 went into investment accounts they didn't know existed. I was building my escape fund again, but this time I was smarter about it. The money wasn't sitting in a shoebox. It was in index funds and retirement accounts with my name only untouchable by anyone else. At the biotech company, I thrived. I wasn't just fixing their systems, I was innovating. I saw problems in how medical imaging data was processed and analyzed, and I started building AI tools to solve those problems. My boss, Dr. Sarah Martinez, was brilliant and supportive. She saw my potential and gave me freedom to experiment. By the time I was 25, I had developed a prototype for an AI diagnostic tool that could analyze chest x-rays and flag potential issues faster than traditional methods. Dr. Martinez was excited. We published a small paper about it, and suddenly people in the medical tech community were paying attention. That's when I made my move. I approached Dr. Martinez with a proposal. I wanted to spin this technology off into its own company. I'd been researching the process for months, learning about venture capital, startup funding, and business formation. I showed her a detailed business plan. She looked at it, looked at me, and smiled. I'll introduce you to some people who can help. But Maya, if you're going to do this, do it right. Protect yourself legally from day one. I took her advice. I reached out to Rebecca Chen, the lawyer who'd mentored me years ago. She connected me with Patrick Vance, who specialized in asset protection and business formation. Patrick was expensive, but he was worth it. We set up my company, MedTech Diagnostics, as a Delaware C corporation. But more importantly, we set up an irrevocable trust structure that would own my shares. Patrick explained it carefully. Once assets went into this trust, they were protected from creditors' lawsuits and claims from family members. I could benefit from the trust, but I couldn't just cash it out. Neither could anyone else. Are you expecting problems with your family? Patrick asked, his sharp eyes watching me carefully. I'm expecting problems with everyone, I said. I just want to be prepared. He nodded. Smart. Most people wait until there's a crisis. You're thinking ahead. We spent weeks setting up the structure. I put my company shares in the trust. As the company grew and I made money, I'd funnel it through the trust. I appointed 3 independent trustees, people who had no connection to my family and would make decisions based on the trust rules, not my emotions. My parents had no idea I was doing any of this. As far as they knew, I was still working at the biotech company for my modest salary, dutifully sending them their monthly checks. They didn't know I'd left to start my own company. They didn't know I'd secured seed funding from a group of angel investors. They didn't know anything. The first 2 years of running MedTech Diagnostics were brutal. I was working 100-hour weeks, living on coffee and protein bars, pushing my diagnostic tools from prototype to market-ready product. I brought on 2 co-founders, brilliant engineers who believed in the vision. We operated out of a cramped office space that smelled like takeout food and ambition. My family still demanded money. Chloe's art career was taking off, she claimed, and she needed funding for a gallery showing. My father wanted to buy a boat. My mother needed a new car. I kept sending them money, smaller amounts now, always with excuses about how my expenses were high, how I was barely getting by. They believed me because they wanted to believe me. What they didn't know was that my company had just signed its first major hospital contract. $3.5 million over 3 years. We'd be profitable within 18 months. My personal net worth tied up in company stock had just crossed 7 figures. I was 27 years old and a millionaire on paper. My family thought I was barely scraping by. That's when I met Leo Chen. Pure coincidence, though later I'd think it was the universe's way of telling me I was on the right path. He was speaking at a cybersecurity conference in San Francisco that I'd attended to learn about protecting our medical data systems. His presentation on encryption and threat detection was brilliant. Afterward, I approached him with questions about how to apply his methods to healthcare data. We ended up talking for 3 hours over terrible conference coffee. He was smart, funny, and had this way of listening that made me feel heard for the first time in my life. We exchanged contact information. He called me 2 days later from Austin, where he was based for a consulting contract. "I'm going to be here for 3 months," he said. "Can I take you to dinner?" Dinner turned into a relationship. For the first few months, I kept him separate from my family. I told them I was too busy with work to come to family dinners as often. They complained but accepted it because I was still sending money. Leo noticed that I was evasive about my family, but he didn't push. Not at first. 6 months into our relationship, he finally asked, "Maya, why won't you tell me about your parents? You talk about your work, your friends, your life, but your family is like this blank space." We were at his apartment eating Thai takeout on his couch. I looked at this man who made me laugh, who supported my career, who never once asked me for anything except my time and honesty. And I told him everything. The theft of my savings, the MIT scholarship I gave up, the years of supporting my family while they treated me like a bank, the resentment I carried like a weight in my chest. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, his expression was stormy. "Maya, you know that's financial abuse, right? What they're doing to you is abuse." No one had ever said that word to me before. Abuse. It sounded too dramatic. Abuse was violence, wasn't it? Abuse was obvious harm. What my family did was just taking advantage, being thoughtless, expecting too much. Wasn't it? "They're my family," I said weakly. "That doesn't give them the right to exploit you." "When's the last time your mother asked how you were doing? Not about money, but about you. How you're feeling, what you're worried about, if you're happy." I thought about it. I genuinely tried to remember. I couldn't. Every conversation with my mother was about what they needed or what Chloe was doing. I was a supporting character in their story, not the protagonist of my own. "I don't know," I admitted. "That's not okay, Maya. That's not how families should work." Leo planted seeds of doubt that grew into full awareness over the next year. I started noticing patterns I'd normalized. How Chloe only called when she wanted something. How my father never asked about my company, never showed interest in my success. How my mother's love always came with conditions and invoices. I also started pulling back slowly. I told them I was having financial difficulties. The economy was tough. Medical technology was competitive. I cut their monthly allowance in half. They were not happy. My mother called crying, talking about how they might lose the house. My father yelled about my obligations to family. Chloe sent me long texts about how I was abandoning them in their time of need. But I held firm. And you know what happened? Nothing. They figured it out. My father got a part-time job. They didn't lose the house. Chloe found other sources of funding. The world didn't end. Leo proposed to me on a random Tuesday morning. We were eating breakfast tacos from our favorite food truck, sitting on the tailgate of his truck, watching the Austin sunrise. He turned to me and said, "Marry me." No ring, no elaborate setup. Just a question from a man who knew me completely and loved me anyway. "Yes," I said. We set a date for 6 months later, a small ceremony we decided. Just friends and people we cared about. I debated whether to invite my family. Leo left it up to me, but I could see in his eyes what he thought I should do. "I have to tell them at least," I said, "about the engagement." I invited them to dinner. Not at my penthouse, which they'd never seen. I'd kept that address private, telling them I was renting a modest apartment across town. We met at a nice restaurant in downtown Austin, the kind of place where tech executives made deals and celebrated wins. I'd just signed a major expansion contract with a pharmaceutical company, and I felt like celebrating. My company was now valued at $15 million. I owned 60% of it through my trust structure. I was worth $9 million. My family had no idea. They still thought I was scraping by. I planned to tell them about the engagement, about Leo, about how happy I was. I'd even thought about maybe finally telling them the truth about my success. Maybe if they knew I was doing well, they'd be happy for me. Maybe we could have a real relationship based on honesty. That's when my father made his announcement. They'd mortgaged the house. Chloe needed funding for her art gallery, and they'd remortgaged to raise the capital. The payments were more than they could handle, so next week they'd be moving in with me. My mother had already started packing. They hadn't asked. They'd just decided that my home, wherever it was now their home too. Decided that my life existed to support theirs. Decided that I had no right to say no. Chloe was smirking at me across the table, her new boyfriend Blake beside her looking smug. They'd probably already planned how they'd take over my supposed modest apartment, push me into the smallest room, make it their space. My mother had that expectant look waiting for me to thank them for including me in their plans. My father wasn't even looking at me. He was studying the wine list, already moving on to the next thing, and something inside me just broke. Or maybe it didn't break. Maybe it finally healed. Maybe it became what it was supposed to be all along. That's when I set down my wine glass. That's when I looked at my father and said the words that would change everything. The buyout price for the penthouse is $1.2 million. I accept payment by check or wire transfer before 9 a.m. tomorrow. The silence was deafening. My father's face went through several emotions at once. Confusion because he didn't understand what I was saying. Realization because he was starting to understand. And then rage, pure undiluted rage because I dared to say no. What the hell are you talking about? His voice was low, dangerous. People at nearby tables were starting to look over. I'm talking about the fact that you just announced you're moving into my home without asking me. So I'm treating this as a real estate transaction. If you want my penthouse, you can buy it. $1.2 million. My mother's eyes were wide. Maya, you said you lived in an apartment. I lied. I own a penthouse. I also own a company worth $15 million. I've been supporting you for 10 years while building my own life, and I'm done. Chloe's mouth dropped open. $15 million. You've been poor-mouthing us this whole time. No, Chloe. I've been protecting myself from you, all of you. Blake decided to chime in because apparently having a rich girlfriend sister made him think he had a voice in this. This is incredibly selfish. You're going to let your family be homeless when you have all this wealth. I turned to him, this trust fund kid, who'd never worked a day in his life, who was dating my sister for her connections and Instagram aesthetic, and I felt nothing but contempt. Blake, you have 10 seconds to stop talking or I'm going to have the restaurant manager ask you to leave. This is a family conversation and you're not family. 10, 9, 8. He shut up at 6. My father found his voice again. You can't do this. That penthouse, that money, that company, it all belongs to this family. We raised you. We invested in you. You owe us. I owe you nothing. You stole my MIT scholarship. You stole $2,000 from my teenage savings. You've taken over $400,000 from me in the past decade. You've never once asked how I was doing what I needed, or if I was happy. I don't owe you a damn thing. My mother started crying. The fake tears, the ones she used when manipulation was required. Maya, sweetheart, when did you become so cold, so mercenary? We're your parents. We love you. That word, love, like it meant something coming from her, like she had any idea what love actually was. I laughed. Actually laughed right there in that expensive restaurant with people staring and my family looking at me like I'd grown a second head. You love what I can provide. You love my bank account. You don't love me. You don't even know me. I stood up, pulled out 3 crisp $100 bills, and dropped them on the table. Dinner's on me. Everything else from now on, you're on your own. I walked out of that restaurant with my head high and my hands shaking. Leo was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his truck. I texted him halfway through dinner a simple code we'd established, 911. He'd come immediately. I made it to his truck before the tears hit. He wrapped his arms around me and I sobbed into his chest, great heaving gasps that came from somewhere deep and wounded and finally starting to heal. I did it, I whispered, and I actually did it. I'm so proud of you, he said. I know that was terrifying. But Maya, you just got your life back. We sat in his truck for a long time, my tears slowly drying, my breathing returning to normal. My phone was buzzing nonstop in my purse. I turned it off without looking at it. What do you think happens now? I asked. Leo was quiet for a moment. They're going to fight. People like that don't give up easily. They're going to try every manipulation tactic they know. They're going to try to make you feel guilty, try to turn people against you, try to find ways to get to you. You need to be ready for that. I am ready, I said, and I meant it. What I wasn't ready for was how quickly they'd escalate, how far they'd be willing to go, how dirty this fight would get. The first attack came before I even made it home that night. Chloe had already posted a video to Instagram and TikTok. I found out because my phone, when I finally turned it back on, had 63 missed calls and over 100 text messages. My company's social media coordinator, Melissa, had sent me an urgent message. Maya, there's a situation. Call me ASAP. I pulled up Chloe's Instagram while Leo drove us back to my penthouse. The video had been posted an hour ago and already had 50,000 views. In it, Chloe sat on her bed, tears streaming down her face, talking about her heartless millionaire sister who was letting her family become homeless. She was good. I had to give her that. She talked about family loyalty, about how our parents had sacrificed everything for us, about how she couldn't believe her own sister would turn her back on them in their darkest hour. She showed old family photos, carefully selected ones that made us look happy and close. She talked about losing our childhood home, about my parents' health problems I didn't even know they had, about how she didn't know what they were going to do. She never mentioned MIT, never mentioned the stolen money, never mentioned 10 years of me supporting them. She just painted a picture of a cruel, greedy sister who'd gotten rich and forgotten where she came from. The comments were vicious. People I'd never met were calling me every name in the book. Someone had found my company website and left 1-star reviews everywhere they could. My Instagram DMs were flooded with hate messages. "This is going to be a PR nightmare," I said, scrolling through the comments. Leo took my phone gently from my hands. "Don't read those. People don't know the truth. They're reacting to her story, not reality. It's going to affect the company. We're about to close that pharmaceutical contract. If they think I'm some heartless monster, then we'll handle it. Maya, you have a lawyer, right? Patrick Vance." "Yeah, but he's an asset protection lawyer, not..." "He'll know who to call. First thing tomorrow, we call him. We document everything Chloe has posted. We build your case, and we prepare for this to get worse before it gets better." He was right about it getting worse. By morning, Chloe's video had over 200,000 views. It had been picked up by one of those viral content accounts with millions of followers. Local news stations were covering it as a human interest story. My phone was ringing off the hook with reporters wanting my side of the story. I didn't give them one. Patrick had been crystal clear on that point when I called him at 7 a.m. "Do not engage. Do not respond. Do not try to defend yourself publicly. Anything you say will be twisted. Let them have their moment. We're playing the long game." But the long game felt excruciating when I had to walk into my office and face my employees. They'd all seen the video. I could see it in their faces, the questions they wanted to ask, but were too professional to voice. My CFO, Marcus, pulled me aside before our morning meeting. "Maya, I need to ask, is any of what she's saying true?" "Which part?" "The part where I'm wealthy, yes. The part where I'm abandoning my family." "That's more complicated." "The board is concerned. We've got calls from 3 investors asking about your character. The pharmaceutical deal is still solid, I'll make sure of it. Marcus, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" He looked at me for a long moment, this man who'd been with me since the company was 3 people in a cramped office. "I trust you, but Maya, you need to control this narrative somehow." I nodded, even though I had no idea how to do that. The morning meeting was tense. I addressed the elephant in the room immediately. "I know you've all seen the video about me online. I'm not going to discuss the details of my personal life, but I want you to know that the situation is not what it appears. I've worked too hard to build this company to let family drama destroy it. We have a job to do, and we're going to do it. Anyone who can't separate my personal life from our professional mission can speak to me privately." No one spoke up, but I could feel the uncertainty in the room, the questions hanging in the air like smoke. After the meeting, I had 3 back-to-back calls with investors. All of them danced around the question, asking about my stability, my judgment, my ability to handle pressure. I gave them the same measured response. Family matters were private. My focus was on the company. Our metrics spoke for themselves. The pharmaceutical company that we were supposed to sign with that week postponed our meeting. Not canceled, they emphasized. Just postponed. They wanted to let things settle down. I knew what that meant. They were waiting to see if this blew over or if I became too toxic to associate with. By midday, I was exhausted and furious. I called Leo. "Tell me again why I can't just post my side of the story." "Because they'll twist it. Because it'll look defensive. Because people have already chosen sides and facts won't change their minds. We need irrefutable proof, Maya. We need to let them hang themselves. They're destroying my reputation, my company's reputation. Temporarily. Trust the process. Patrick has a plan, right?" Patrick's plan involved patience and documentation. His associate was already archiving every post, every comment, every piece of content Chloe was creating. We were building a timeline, a pattern of behavior, but it felt passive when I wanted to fight. The afternoon brought a new development. My father showed up at my office, again. Except this time, he wasn't alone. He'd brought my mother and Chloe, and they'd somehow gotten past reception. My assistant Jenny ran into my office, her face pale. "Maya, I'm so sorry. They said it was an emergency. They're in the conference room and they're refusing to leave until you talk to them." I felt my jaw clench. Call building security. Tell them we have trespassers who need to be removed. But they're your family. They're trespassers who weren't invited and don't have permission to be here. Call security now. I didn't go to the conference room. I didn't give them the satisfaction of another confrontation. Instead, I stayed in my office and watched through the glass as 2 security guards approached them. I could see my mother crying, my father arguing, Chloe recording everything on her phone. Of course she was recording. This was content for her. My boundaries, my pain, my professional life. All of it was just material for her to monetize online. The security guards were professional but firm. My family was escorted out. As they left, my father turned and shouted loud enough for the entire office to hear, "You're going to regret this. You're destroying this family." Every employee on the floor had stopped working to watch. I felt humiliation burn through me, but I kept my expression neutral. When they were gone, I walked out to the main floor and addressed everyone. I apologize for that disruption. My family is going through some difficulties and they're handling it poorly. This is exactly why we have security protocols. Everyone, please return to your work. I went back to my office, closed the door, and allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to fall apart. 5 minutes of rage and tears and wanting to scream. Then I cleaned up my face, fixed my makeup, and went back to work. That evening, Chloe posted the security footage. She'd edited it to make it look like I'd called security on my tearful, desperate family without even talking to them. The caption read, "My sister wouldn't even speak to us. She called armed guards to throw out her own mother. I don't recognize her anymore." The video went viral. 1.5 million views in 6 hours. My company's Glassdoor rating dropped 2 points as fake reviews flooded in. Someone started a GoFundMe for my parents, claiming they were about to be homeless. It raised $30,000 in 2 days. That's when I realized we were in a full-scale war and my family wasn't playing by any rules. Patrick called an emergency meeting. We sat in his office, Leo beside me, and Patrick laid out the situation. "They're escalating. The social media campaign is just the beginning. I expect they'll try legal action next." "On what grounds?" I asked. "It doesn't matter. The grounds will be frivolous, but the point is to drain your resources and energy, to make fighting harder than giving in. It's a common tactic." He was right. 3 days later, I was served with papers. My parents were suing me for elder abuse and financial neglect. They were claiming that I had promised to support them, that they had relied on these promises to their detriment, and that I was now abandoning them in violation of an implied contract. The lawsuit was absurd from a legal standpoint. Texas law doesn't require adult children to support their parents. But absurd doesn't mean harmless. The lawsuit was public record. Local news picked it up. The narrative shifted from rich sister abandons family to daughter sued for elder abuse. My mother gave an interview to a local news station. She sat in their modest living room, tissues in hand, talking about how she and my father had sacrificed everything for their daughters, how they'd taken out loans to support my education and Chloe's artistic development, how I'd promised to take care of them, how they never imagined their own daughter would turn her back on them. It was all lies, but it was persuasive lies. The interviewer looked at my mother with sympathy, asked gentle questions, didn't challenge any of her claims. When they reached out to me for comment, I directed them to Patrick, who gave them a bland statement about how we don't comment on pending litigation. But the damage was done. The court of public opinion had convicted me. The pharmaceutical company canceled our meeting permanently. 3 potential investors backed out of commitments. 2 employees quit saying they didn't feel comfortable working for someone with my values. My stress levels were through the roof, and I was barely sleeping. Leo found me at 2 a.m. one night, sitting at my kitchen counter, scrolling through hate comments on my laptop. He gently closed the laptop and took my hands. "This is what they want. They want you broken down, exhausted, willing to give in just to make it stop. Don't give them that." "I'm losing everything," I whispered. "The company I built, my reputation, my peace of mind. Maybe I should just give them what they want." "And then what? You give them money now and they'll be back in 6 months wanting more. You give them the penthouse and they'll take over your life. You give into this lawsuit and they'll sue you again. Maya, you can't negotiate with terrorists. They're my family. They're people who are terrorizing you. There's a difference." He was right, but knowing he was right didn't make it easier. The legal battle dragged on for weeks. Discovery was invasive and humiliating. My parents' lawyer requested every financial record I had, every text message, every email. They were looking for anything that could be construed as a promise to support them. Patrick had prepared me for this and everything was in order, but it still felt violating. During this time, my company was barely holding on. We'd lost deals, we'd lost talent. Our reputation was taking hit after hit. I was spending more time managing the family crisis than running my business, and it showed. Our quarterly numbers were down. The board was concerned. Marcus pulled me aside after a particularly tense meeting. Maya, I hate to say this, but we might need to consider bringing in outside management, just temporarily until you can sort out your personal situation. You want to replace me in my own company, not replace, support. You're drowning and the company is drowning with you. We need someone who can focus full-time while you deal with this legal mess. It felt like betrayal, but I couldn't argue with his logic. I was drowning. I agreed to bring in an interim COO, someone who could handle day-to-day operations while I focused on survival. That's when things took an even darker turn. I came home one evening to find my building's garage entrance cordoned off with police tape. A security guard approached me before I could pull in. Ms. Evans, there's been an incident with your vehicle. You need to speak with the officers. My heart sank. I parked on the street and walked to the garage. My silver Porsche, the car I'd bought myself as a celebration of my first major success, was covered in red spray paint. Crude words were sprayed across the hood and doors. Traitor, selfish, heartless. 2 police officers were taking photos. One of them approached me. Ms. Evans, I'm Officer Rodriguez. We've got the whole thing on your building's security cameras. Do you know these individuals? He showed me his tablet. Clear footage of Chloe and Blake entering the garage, looking around nervously, then spray painting my car. Blake was holding the can. Chloe was keeping watch. It was premeditated. It was deliberate. It was a felony. That's my sister and her boyfriend, I said, my voice flat. We've put out a warrant for their arrest. The damage estimate is over $5,000, which makes this a state jail felony. We'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt like justice was finally happening. Instead, I just felt tired. So incredibly tired. Leo drove me to the police station. I gave my statement. I pressed charges. The officer asked if I wanted to request a protective order, and I said yes. Yes to all of it. I was done being the bigger person. I was done protecting people who were trying to destroy me. Chloe and Blake were arrested the next morning. The mugshots made the news. Blake's family posted his bail within hours. Chloe sat in county jail for 8 hours before my parents could scrape together the bail money. She posted a video from her phone right after she got out, tears streaming down her face, claiming she'd been falsely arrested, that the system was rigged in favor of the wealthy, that I had used my money and influence to target her. The video got 3 million views. Half the comments supported her. Half the comments called her out for committing a crime on camera. The internet was divided, which meant nothing would change. Both sides would just dig in deeper. But something had shifted. Some of the initial supporters were starting to ask questions. Why would someone vandalize property? Why was the boyfriend involved? How did this fit with the narrative of a desperate family just trying to survive? Small cracks were appearing in their story, but the fortress was still standing. The court date for the protective order hearing was set for 3 weeks out. Patrick used that time to build our case. We had the vandalism footage. We had Chloe's social media posts. We had documentation of every instance where they'd shown up at my office uninvited. We had text messages threatening me. We had everything we needed. But my family had something too. They had their lawyer, Donald Prescott, who was older than dirt and had a reputation for sleazy tactics. And they had public sympathy, which in its own way was a form of power. The hearing was held in a crowded courtroom. My family showed up with their lawyer and about a dozen supporters people from Chloe's social media following who believed in her cause. They'd coordinated their attendance online planning to pack the courtroom and show the judge how much public support the family had. I showed up with Patrick, Leo, and Marcus, who'd taken the morning off to support me. That was it. No crowd, no supporters, just me and the people who actually knew the truth. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Margaret Brennan, and she had a reputation for being no nonsense. She looked at the packed gallery, looked at the camera phones that several people were holding, and her expression hardened. This is a courtroom, not a circus. Anyone recording will be held in contempt and removed. Phones away. Now. There was reluctant compliance. Judge Brennan looked at the case file, then at me, then at Chloe and Blake sitting with their lawyer. Let's make this simple. Ms. Evans, you're requesting a protective order against your sister, Chloe Evans, and Blake Morrison. On what grounds? Patrick stood. Your Honor, we have evidence of harassment, vandalism, and threatening behavior. The respondents have engaged in a coordinated campaign to damage Ms. Evans's reputation and livelihood, culminating in the destruction of her property. We have security footage, social media posts, and witness testimony. Donald Prescott heaved himself to his feet. Your Honor, this is a family dispute being blown out of proportion. Ms. Evans is a wealthy woman who refuses to help her struggling family. Her sister and parents are simply trying to communicate with her, and she's using her resources to criminalize normal family dynamics. Judge Brennan raised an eyebrow. Spray painting someone's car is normal family dynamics, Mr. Prescott. It was a cry for help, Your Honor. A desperate act by a young woman who feels abandoned by her only sister. It was vandalism caught on camera. But let's proceed. Ms. Evans, tell me what's been happening. I stood and told my story. Not the emotional version, but the factual one. The dinner where they announced they'd be moving into my home without asking. The social media campaign that followed. The disruptions at my workplace. The escalating harassment. The destruction of my property. I kept my voice steady, my presentation professional. Then Patrick played the footage. The restaurant security cameras had captured the dinner. You could hear my father's announcement, hear the expectation in his voice. You could hear my calm response and see their shock. Then came the office security footage of them refusing to leave, my father shouting threats. Finally, the garage footage of the vandalism. Judge Brennan watched all of it without expression. When it was over, she turned to Chloe and Blake. Do you dispute that this is you in the footage? Y'all. Chloe's lawyer started to speak, but she cut him off. I'm asking the respondents directly. Is that you? Chloe looked at her lawyer, then at the judge. Yes, but no buts. Did you vandalize your sister's vehicle? I was emotional. She was ruining our family. Answer the question. Did you vandalize your sister's vehicle? Yes. Judge Brennan made a note. Mr. Morrison, did you participate in this vandalism? Blake shifted in his seat. Yes, Your Honor. Knowing it was illegal. Yes. Another note. Judge Brennan leaned back in her chair. Mr. Prescott, your client has admitted to committing a felony against her sister. Are you seriously arguing that a protective order isn't warranted? Your Honor, family relationships are complicated. Not that complicated. Here's what I see. Ms. Evans established a boundary. Her family didn't like that boundary and chose to harass her, disrupt her business, and ultimately destroy her property. That's not complicated. That's criminal behavior dressed up in family dynamics language. She signed the protective order on the spot. 500 feet, no contact. No third-party contact. If either Chloe or Blake violated it, they'd go to jail. But that wasn't the end. As we were leaving the courtroom, Donald Prescott approached Patrick. We need to discuss the elder abuse lawsuit. My clients are willing to settle. There's nothing to settle, Patrick said. Your clients have no case and you know it. They have public opinion, they have sympathy. Your client has a damaged reputation that's affecting her business. We both know she'd rather make this go away. Patrick smiled, and it wasn't a friendly smile. Actually, we wouldn't. Discovery in that lawsuit is going to be very interesting. All those financial records, all those text messages, all that proof of exactly how much money Ms. Evans has given her family over the years. That's going to be public record. Is that really what your clients want? I watched the color drain from Prescott's face as he realized what Patrick was saying. The lawsuit would expose everything. Every dollar I'd given them, every lie they'd told, every time they'd taken advantage of me. It would all come out in discovery, and it would all be public. I need to consult with my clients, Prescott said. You do that. We'll be filing our response next week along with a countersuit for defamation based on your client's social media campaign. We're seeking damages and demanding they post public corrections. Your move, counsel. We walked out of the courthouse, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Not because it was over, but because I could finally see that it might end someday. Over the next few days, things started to shift. Some of Chloe's social media followers began posting critiques of her story, pointing out inconsistencies, questioning why she'd committed vandalism if she was truly the victim. A few journalists started digging deeper, finding records of my charitable donations. My company's growth, the scholarship fund I'd established years ago for underprivileged students. The narrative was slowly changing, but my family wasn't done fighting. My parents changed tactics. Instead of aggression, they tried guilt. My mother left voicemails sobbing, begging me to drop the charges against Chloe, saying they were a family and families forgave each other. My father sent emails with titles like, "When did we lose you?" and "Remember when we were happy." I didn't respond to any of it. Patrick had been clear. No contact meant no contact. Every voicemail, every email, every attempt to reach me just added to our documentation of harassment. Then came the surprise. My Aunt Karen called. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not since she'd distanced herself from the family for reasons she'd never fully explained. Her number wasn't blocked because I'd honestly forgotten she existed. Maya, it's Karen. Please don't hang up. Aunt Karen? I know this is unexpected. I saw what's happening online. I need to talk to you. Can we meet? Part of me wanted to say no. Anyone connected to my family was suspect at this point. But something in her voice made me pause. Why? Because I should have helped you years ago and I didn't. Because I know things about your parents that you need to know. Because what they're doing to you is exactly what they did to your grandfather, and I watched him die bitter and alone because of it. Please, Maya, 1 hour, that's all I'm asking. We met at a coffee shop the next morning. Karen looked older than I remembered, her hair more gray, her face more lined. But her eyes were sharp and sad. Thank you for meeting me, she said as we sat down with our coffees. I know you have no reason to trust me. You're right, I don't, so tell me why I should. She pulled out a folder from her bag. Because I have 20 years of documentation that proves your parents have been planning to exploit you since you were 10 years old. She opened the folder and showed me letters, emails, printed out handwritten notes. All of them communications between my parents discussing me in terms that made my stomach turn. Talking about my potential earning power, strategizing how to keep me close and dependent, planning how to maximize what they could extract from my success. One email from my mother to my father dated when I was 16. We need to make sure Maya doesn't get too independent. If she goes to some fancy college across the country, we'll lose access to her future income. Better to encourage local schools or have her defer a year or two. By then she'll be used to supporting the family. Another note in my father's handwriting. Maya's SAT scores came back. 1510. That's MIT material. If she gets in, we position it as a family investment. Everything she earns later is return on that investment. How do you have these? I asked, my voice shaking. Because I was my brother's confidant before I realized what he was doing. He'd share these things with me thinking I'd be impressed by his financial planning. Instead, I was horrified. When I confronted him about treating his daughter like a retirement account, he cut me off. Said I was jealous because I never had kids of my own. She showed me more documents. Proof that they'd planned to mortgage their house and blame it on Chloe's needs, knowing I'd feel obligated to help. Proof that Chloe had been coached on how to approach me for money, what emotional buttons to push. Proof that my entire childhood had been a calculated strategy to create a successful daughter they could exploit. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because I was a coward. I convinced myself that maybe I was wrong, maybe they'd change, maybe it wouldn't be as bad as I feared. And then I distanced myself because I couldn't watch it happen. I'm sorry, Maya. I'm so sorry, but I'm not going to be a coward anymore. I'll testify. I'll give all of this to your lawyer, whatever you need. I took the folder with shaking hands. This was the evidence we needed. Irrefutable proof that this wasn't just family drama or misunderstanding. This was calculated long-term financial abuse. Patrick nearly cried when he saw it. This is perfect. This is airtight. Maya, with this, we don't just win the lawsuit, we destroy it. 2 days later, Donald Prescott called Patrick. The elder abuse lawsuit was being dropped. My parents were withdrawing their claims. They were also willing to agree to the protective order terms and would cease all social media posting about me. What changed? I asked Patrick. I sent them copies of your aunt's documentation with a note saying this was just a preview of what would come out in discovery. They realized they couldn't win. More importantly, they realized that if this went to trial, everyone would see exactly what they are. But we weren't letting them off that easily. The defamation countersuit was moving forward. As part of the settlement negotiation, we demanded a public apology and retraction, not just from Chloe, but from all of them. The video went up on a Friday evening. Chloe sat in front of her camera looking exhausted and defeated. Blake was notably absent. He'd broken up with her the day after they were arrested, immediately flying back to California and his family's money. I need to address the videos and posts I've made about my sister Maya over the past 2 months. She started reading from a script that Patrick had approved. The story I told was not complete or truthful. The truth is that my family and I have financially depended on Maya for over 10 years. She has given us hundreds of thousands of dollars during that time, supporting our lifestyle and choices without complaint. She continued explaining the MIT scholarship I'd given up, the money they'd taken, the years of expectations and demands. Her voice was flat, defeated, but every word was clear. When Maya set a boundary and said she wouldn't continue to support us or allow us to move into her home, I reacted badly. I started a social media campaign to hurt her reputation because I was angry that she wouldn't keep giving us money. I vandalized her property. I lied about her character. Everything I said about Maya being heartless or abandoning us was false. She has every right to live her own life without financially supporting her adult family members. The video ended with a formal apology. It wasn't heartfelt, but it didn't need to be. It needed to be public, and it was. The response was immediate. Her follower count, which had actually grown during the controversy, plummeted. She lost 60,000 followers in 24 hours. Brands that had been approaching her backed away. The gallery that was going to host her art show canceled. Her influencer career died in real time. Comments on the video were split between people who appreciated the honesty and people who were furious at being manipulated. But the narrative had finally definitively shifted. I wasn't the villain anymore. My company's reputation started to recover. The pharmaceutical company reached out to reschedule our meeting. Investors who'd backed away started calling again. Employees who'd been nervous about working for me relaxed. The interim COO I'd brought in helped stabilize things, and within a month, we were back on track. My parents' situation deteriorated quickly. Without my financial support and with legal fees from their failed lawsuit, they couldn't keep up with their mortgage payments. The bank started foreclosure proceedings. They put the house on the market, but given its condition and the outstanding debt, they weren't going to clear anything from the sale. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a lower-income area of Austin. My father, who'd been essentially retired for years, had to go back to work. He got a job at an electronics store, doing the kind of retail work he'd always said was beneath him. My mother got a job at a grocery store working the register. Chloe's fall was even harder. The art gallery never happened. No one wanted to fund her projects anymore. Her social media presence was toxic. She ended up getting a job as a barista at a chain coffee shop, working for minimum wage plus tips. The lifestyle she'd built, the image she'd cultivated, all of it disappeared. Part of me felt satisfaction watching them face consequences for once in their lives. But mostly I just felt empty. These were people who could have been my family, my support system, my cheerleaders. Instead, they'd chosen to be parasites. And now everyone had lost. Except I hadn't lost. Not really. I'd lost the illusion of having a loving family, but that illusion had been costing me everything real in my life. The protective order meant they couldn't contact me directly, but they found ways. My mother left letters at my office front desk asking for forgiveness. My father sent messages through distant relatives. Chloe commented on my company's public posts under fake accounts until we blocked her IP. I ignored all of it. I'd said everything I needed to say. The rest was silence. 6 months after that dinner, that changed everything. Leo and I got married on a beach in Monterey, California. It was a small ceremony, just 20 people. Close friends, colleagues who'd become friends. Aunt Karen, who cried through the entire ceremony. People who loved me for who I was, not what I could provide. No Richard, no Susan, no Chloe. As I stood there with my feet in the sand, the Pacific Ocean stretching out endlessly before us, Leo's hand warm in mine, I didn't feel the absence of my biological family. I felt free. The ceremony was simple. We'd written our own vows. When it was my turn, I looked into Leo's eyes and said, "You taught me that love isn't supposed to cost everything I have, that boundaries aren't selfish, that I deserve to be valued for who I am, not what I can give. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I promise to spend the rest of my life building something real with you, something based on truth and respect and actual love." There wasn't a dry eye on that beach. The reception was at a small restaurant overlooking the water. We ate good food, drank good wine, and celebrated with people who genuinely cared about us. Marcus gave a speech about watching me build a company from nothing while fighting battles on all fronts. Aunt Karen told stories about me as a child, that I didn't even remember, moments of cleverness and determination that she'd noticed even when my parents hadn't. And then we danced. Leo and I swaying to music as the sun set over the Pacific, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt completely at peace. The company thrived. Within a year, we'd not only recovered from the reputation damage, but grown beyond it. The pharmaceutical contract we'd almost lost ended up being worth $40 million over 5 years. We expanded into new areas of diagnostic technology. Our staff grew to over 100 employees. We moved into a bigger office space in downtown Austin, a beautiful renovated building with floor-to-ceiling windows. I stood in that new office one morning, coffee in hand, looking out at the Austin skyline. The city glittered in the early light, all glass and steel and possibility. My company, my choice, my life. Leo came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking about how different everything is now. How quiet my life is without all that chaos. Do you miss them? It was a fair question. I considered it honestly. I miss the idea of them. I miss the family I wish I'd had. But I don't miss the reality of what they were. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. I got an email from Marcus yesterday. The scholarship fund wants to increase the number of awards. Applications are way up. The Phoenix MIT Scholarship Fund had been my passion project for the past year. I'd endowed it with $2 million specifically designed for talented young women in STEM who'd had to give up educational opportunities because of family obligations or financial hardship. Everything I wish I'd had. We'd awarded our first 5 scholarships last year. One of them, a brilliant young woman named Jessica, who'd spent 3 years working to pay off her family's medical debt, had just completed her first semester at MIT. She sent me monthly updates filled with excitement about her classes and research opportunities. You're changing lives, Leo said. I'm giving people the chance I didn't get. That feels important. My phone buzzed. An email from Patrick Vance. The subject line read, Final Settlement Documentation. The legal battles were finally officially over. My parents had signed agreements stating they would make no further claims against me or my assets. Chloe's criminal case had been resolved with community service and probation. The protective orders would stay in place for 3 more years. It was done, all of it done. That evening, Leo and I went to dinner at one of our favorite restaurants, a little Italian place that made pasta from scratch. As we ate, we talked about the future. Maybe expanding into European markets. Maybe buying a house outside the city. Maybe eventually kids of our own. Would you want children? I asked him. After everything with my family, I'd want children with you, he said simply. And Maya, you know what our family would look like. We'd build it intentionally with love and respect and actual healthy boundaries. We'd break every toxic pattern your parents modeled. You really think I could do that? Be a good parent after growing up with them? I think you'd be an amazing parent precisely because of what you went through. You know exactly what not to do. You know what emotional abuse looks like. You know how to set boundaries. And most importantly, you know that your children's worth isn't measured by their usefulness to you. I felt tears prick my eyes. Good tears for once. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You were just too stressed to notice. We laughed and it felt good. Natural. Easy. This was what life was supposed to feel like. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a tech conference about building resilient companies in the face of personal adversity. I almost said no. I didn't want to be defined by my family drama, but the organizer convinced me that my story might help others who were struggling with similar issues. So I stood on that stage in front of 500 entrepreneurs and business leaders, and I told my story. Not the tabloid version, but the real one. How I'd built a successful company while being financially and emotionally exploited by my family. How I'd finally set boundaries. How it had almost destroyed everything before it set me free. The hardest thing I ever did was say no to my family, I told the audience. Not because I didn't love them, but because their version of love was slowly killing me. I learned that boundaries aren't selfish. That self-preservation isn't betrayal. That you can't build something meaningful on a foundation of guilt and obligation. I talked about the practical steps I'd taken. The legal protections I'd put in place years before I needed them. The support system I'd built with friends and mentors. The decision to document everything knowing that someday I might need proof. If you're in a similar situation, start protecting yourself now. Don't wait for the crisis. Open separate bank accounts. Document everything. Build relationships with professionals who can help you. Lawyers, therapists, financial advisors. Create legal structures that protect your assets before you need them. And most importantly, remember that you're not responsible for other people's choices, even if those people are family. The standing ovation surprised me. People came up afterward, some of them crying, telling me their own stories of toxic family relationships and financial abuse. I realized I wasn't alone. There were thousands of us out there, successful people, who'd had to choose between our families and our futures. One woman, a venture capitalist in her 40s, pulled me aside. My parents did the same thing. For 20 years, I gave them everything they asked for because I thought that's what good daughters did. It wasn't until they tried to take my house that I finally woke up. Thank you for telling your story. People need to hear that it's okay to choose yourself. That conversation stayed with me for days. The shame I'd carried, the guilt, the feeling that I was somehow wrong for setting boundaries. None of it was unique to me. It was a pattern, a dynamic that played out in families everywhere, and the more we talked about it, the less power it had. The months that followed were peaceful in a way I'd never experienced. I woke up without dread. I checked my phone without anxiety. I made business decisions without wondering if they'd somehow be used against me. The constant background noise of manipulation and guilt had finally gone silent. My company continued to grow. We hired a brilliant new research team and started developing predictive diagnostic tools that could identify diseases years before symptoms appeared. The pharmaceutical company that had almost dropped us became our biggest partner. We were making a real difference in healthcare, saving lives, improving outcomes. But the work that felt most meaningful was the scholarship fund. By the end of the second year, we'd increased it to 10 scholarships annually. I personally interviewed every finalist, wanting to understand their stories, their dreams, their obstacles. So many of them reminded me of myself at 18, brilliant, driven, and trapped by family obligations. One girl, Maria, had been supporting her younger siblings since their mother died. She'd put her college dreams on hold for 5 years to make sure they were fed and housed. When I told her she'd won the scholarship, she burst into tears. "I can actually go," she asked, her voice breaking. "I can actually do this. You can do this. And Maria, when you get there, I want you to remember something. Taking care of yourself isn't abandonment. Building your future isn't betrayal. You deserve this opportunity, and you don't have to feel guilty about taking it." She hugged me, and I felt something heal inside my own chest. I couldn't change my past, but I could change someone else's future. That had to mean something. 3 years after that fateful dinner, I got an unexpected call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Maya, it's me, it's Chloe." My first instinct was to hang up. The protective order had expired 6 months ago, but I'd had no contact with any of them since. Hearing her voice brought back a flood of memories, not all of them bad, which somehow made it worse. "You're not supposed to contact me," I said, my voice cold. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. But Maya, I'm in therapy. Real therapy, not some retreat scam. And my therapist thinks I need to make amends. Not for me, for you. So if you want to hang up, I understand. But I'm asking for 5 minutes. That's all." Against my better judgment, I didn't hang up. 5 minutes, starting now. "I was jealous of you," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "My whole life I was jealous. You were smart and independent and capable, and I was the artistic one, the creative one, which was just code for useless. Mom and Dad invested in me because they knew you didn't need them. You were going to be successful no matter what. I was their project, their fixer-upper, and I hated that. I hated being the weak one." I stayed silent, letting her talk. "So when you started making real money, when you built that company, I convinced myself that you owed us, that your success was somehow owed to us because we'd let you be the smart one. I know how insane that sounds. I know how toxic that is, but that's what I believed, and Mom and Dad encouraged it because it benefited them. Chloe, I gave up MIT for you. I gave up my dream so you could go to Bali. I know, and I've spent 3 years in therapy trying to unpack how messed up that was, how messed up our whole family was. Maya, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything. I just need you to know that I understand now what we did to you, what I did to you, and I'm sorry. I'm so genuinely sorry." 4 minutes had passed. I had 1 minute left, and I didn't know what to say. Sorry didn't fix the years of exploitation. Sorry didn't give me back my scholarship. Sorry didn't undo the damage to my reputation or my business or my peace of mind. But sorry was something. It was more than I'd expected to ever get. "What do you want from me, Chloe?" "Nothing. I don't want anything. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what we were, what I was, and I'm trying to be different. I'm working a regular job, paying my own bills, going to therapy twice a week. I'm learning how to be a person who doesn't use people. It's hard. It's really hard. But I'm trying." "Good," I said, and I meant it. "I hope you figure it out, Chloe. I really do. Can I ask you one thing? Do you think maybe someday we could talk again? Not now, I know you're not ready, but someday." I thought about it. About the little girl who used to follow me around before the jealousy and manipulation took over. About the sister I might have had in a different family under different circumstances. "Maybe," I said. "Someday, but not now. Now I need you to respect my boundaries and let me live my life." "I can do that. Thank you for not hanging up, Maya. That's more than I deserved." She hung up before I could respond. I sat there with the phone in my hand, emotions swirling. Leo found me like that, staring at nothing. "Who was that?" he asked. "Chloe," she apologized. "How do you feel?" "I don't know." Sad maybe, not for her, but for what could have been. For the family we might have been if they'd made different choices. Leo sat beside me, took my hand. You know you don't have to forgive her, right? You don't owe her anything. I know, and I don't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it's something hearing her admit what they did. It's validation that I wasn't crazy, that it really was as bad as I thought. It was worse than you thought. You just normalized it because it was all you knew. He was right. I had normalized so much. The theft, the manipulation, the guilt-tripping, the constant demands. I'd thought that was just what family meant. It took walking away to realize how wrong that was. A few months later, I got news that my father had had a heart attack. A minor one, but still serious. Aunt Karen called to tell me, her voice careful. I know you don't want contact with them, but I thought you should know. He's stable, he's going to be okay. But Maya, he's asking for you. What does he want? I don't know, maybe to apologize? Maybe to ask for help. I can't read his mind. But he specifically asked if I could reach out to you. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to go to see if maybe finally he understood what he'd done. But a bigger part of me knew that going would open a door I'd worked hard to close. It would signal that I was available again, that my boundaries were negotiable. Tell him I hope he recovers, I said. But I'm not coming. If he wants to reach out to me when he's better, he can write me a letter, a real one, not asking for anything, just acknowledging what happened. If he does that, maybe we can talk. But I'm not showing up to his hospital bed to be guilted into giving him something. Aunt Karen was quiet for a moment. That's fair. That's more than fair. I'll tell him. The letter never came. Whether my father couldn't bring himself to write it or simply didn't think he needed to, I never found out. But the silence told me everything I needed to know. Even a heart attack wasn't enough to make him look honestly at what he'd done. And that was okay. I had stopped waiting for them to change, stopped hoping for the family I deserved. I'd built my own family instead. Leo, Aunt Karen, my closest friends, my employees, who'd become like siblings, the scholarship recipients, who sent me updates and photos and thank you notes. That was my family now, the family I chose, the family that chose me back. 5 years after that dinner, MedTech Diagnostics went public. We'd grown to 300 employees, partnerships with major hospitals across the country, and diagnostic tools that were saving lives every day. The IPO valued the company at $200 million. My personal net worth, mostly tied up in stock, was over $80 million. I was 33 years old and one of the youngest female CEOs in biotech. Forbes did a profile on me. TechCrunch called me a pioneer. None of it felt as good as I thought it would. The success was satisfying, yes, but it wasn't the point anymore. The point was the work, the impact, the difference we were making. On the day of the IPO, I stood on the floor of the NASDAQ exchange with Leo Marcus and my core team. We rang the opening bell, watched our stock price climb, celebrated with champagne. And then I went back to work because there were diseases to diagnose and lives to save. That evening, I got a message on LinkedIn from someone I didn't know. Hi Maya, I'm a journalist working on a piece about family estrangement and financial abuse. I'd love to interview you about your experience if you're willing to talk. I think your story could help a lot of people. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it to keep my private pain private. But I thought about the woman at the conference who'd thanked me for sharing. I thought about all the scholarship applicants who'd told me about their own toxic families. I thought about how much shame I'd carried thinking I was the only one. I agreed to the interview. The article came out 3 months later in a major magazine, a long-form piece about successful people who'd had to cut ties with their families. My story was one of 5 featured. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people reached out sharing their own experiences, thanking me for speaking up, asking for advice. I realized that this was another kind of impact I could have, not just through my company or my scholarship fund, but through honesty. Through refusing to pretend that family bonds were sacred when they were actually toxic. Through giving other people permission to choose themselves. I started speaking more openly about it. At conferences and interviews, on panels about women in tech and entrepreneurship. I always made the same points. You're not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Blood relation doesn't justify abuse. Success you build yourself can't be taken away if you protect it properly. And most importantly, choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Now, 7 years after that dinner that changed everything, I'm standing in my new office. MedTech Diagnostics just moved into a state-of-the-art facility on the edge of Austin, a beautiful building designed to inspire innovation. My office has floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over the Texas Hill Country, rolling green hills that stretch to the horizon. Leo comes up behind me, wraps his arms around my waist, rests his chin on my shoulder. We've been married for 6 years now, and he still makes my heart skip a beat. "What are you thinking about?" he asks. "Everything, nothing. How different my life is now." Better different. Infinitely better. Sometimes I think about who I'd be if I'd never set that boundary. If I'd just given in, let them move into my penthouse, kept supporting them forever. You'd be miserable, probably broke, definitely resentful. Probably, but I'd have a family, at least on paper. You have a family, Maya. You have me. You have Aunt Karen. You have 50 scholarship recipients who adore you. You have 300 employees who respect you. You have friends who love you. That's family. The real kind, not the DNA kind. He's right. I know he's right. But some small part of me still mourns what could have been. The parents who could have been proud of me. The sister who could have been my friend. The childhood that could have been full of support instead of exploitation. But mourning doesn't mean regret. I don't regret my choices. Not one of them. My phone buzzes. It's a text from Jessica, my first scholarship recipient. She's graduating from MIT this spring, starting a PhD program at Stanford in the fall. She wants to know if I'll come to her graduation. Of course I'll come. I wouldn't miss it for anything. That's my legacy now. Not the company, though I'm proud of it. Not the money, though it's nice to have security. My legacy is the doors I'm opening for others, the cycles I'm breaking, the permission I'm giving people to choose themselves. I think about 18-year-old Maya holding that MIT acceptance letter with shaking hands, making the decision to defer her dreams for her family. I wish I could go back and tell her no. Tell her to go to run, to never look back. But I can't change the past. I can only change the future for others. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting yourself? Have you ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to love you because staying was destroying you? What did you do, and do you regret it? Drop your stories in the comments below. Let's support each other in this journey of setting boundaries and reclaiming our lives. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is share our truth and let others know they're not alone. Your worth is not determined by what you can give to others. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you provide. Never forget that.